Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the Scripting Them podcast. So in today's episode, I'm going to be covering a topic that I actually wrote about recently, and I've been getting some questions or at least feedback about it. So I just thought I will give you in podcast form sort of a summarized version of that article, and then I'll link to the full article if you want to know more on the show notes. But the topic at hand is the top 5 skills that you should have as a backend developer. Either you're thinking about transitioning into backend from front end or from some other area, or you are a backend developer but you're just getting started and you're wondering whether you're doing it right, you're focusing your time on learning the right skills. So I'm gonna give you 5 skills that you definitely must have as a backend developer. Are these the only skills that you have to have? No, clearly they're not. But they're definitely basic ones that you should definitely have and master to the point of fully understanding some of these points at least. So because they will be the basics for everything else that you learn. So the first one, it's the most obvious one, but you have to pick a language. You have to it doesn't really make sense for you to try and learn everything, all backend languages, because honestly, there are way too many. And if you're wondering which one's the right one, then there is no real answer to that question. Backend development is very varied. It's not like front end, in which you have JavaScript or maybe TypeScript, but that's it. In backend, you have way too many options. You have Java, JavaScript, Python, Go, you have Rust, you have, obviously Ruby, you have way too many. And if you're just getting started, trying to learn all of them, it's just gonna be a waste of time, and you're not really going to become good at all of them at the same time. Eventually, over the years, you might want to pick up different ones, absolutely. But if you're just getting started, the recommendation will be to just pick one. Which one? The one that is easiest for you. Or if you're already looking into some, if you're already working as part of a team, then obviously pick the technology that they're using and focus on that. If you're looking at some companies, some job ads, and you're seeing some trends on the type of technology that they request, also focus on that. But if you have no guideline, just focus on the one that makes more sense to you or is easiest to learn. Why is that not really that relevant? Because even though you might not pick the right language for you, you will still understand and learn different backend concepts through that language that you will be able to take to other, extrapolate into other languages in the future. So even though you might want to start learning Python now, and you will never, in the future use it for any project, you still got to learn a lot about how HTTP works, about front end, back end interactions, a lot of things, a lot of skills through Python that you'll be able to take with you into the next technology. So really don't overthink the language, just pick one. If you're coming from front end, obviously the easiest one is probably JavaScript. Through Node, you'll be able to ramp up quite easily because most of the language is the same. You just have to understand that there is no DOM API now. You're no longer in the front end, but the language itself, the structure, the control structures, and everything are going to be the same. So that's a good way to pick one. Now, while looking at technologies, while looking at programming languages, 2 things will happen. One is you'll definitely have to make a decision. You'll definitely have to pick from the entire list of available technologies. You'll have to pick one and focus on that. But at the same time, while you're doing that, a lot of new options are going to come up, and they will be created. New languages, every few years we usually get a new language, either as a variation of an existing one or as a complete new paradigm. The adjacent skill that you should also develop is the ways for you to be able to, while learning, while focusing on your own goals, on your own language that you picked, also keep an eye for things that are popping up. Not just get completely derailed and pick something else and just jump from one to the other and never really master anything, but rather keep an eye on what people are saying about the new technology. Keep an eye on how many shop ads are for that new technology. The reason why I say this is because every once in a while we get a new language that sticks around. Every once in a while we get something that makes sense to the industry and they adopt it. And in some cases, that adoption might also mean the replacement of an old technology. So what I'm trying to say here is you have to focus on one technology and learn it, but at the same time, try to make sure that whatever is coming up and whatever is popping up during this learning process is not going to replace what you're what you're learning right now. It's not easy. It's not an easy thing to do, and it requires some practice as well. You have to learn to pick up the right information sources and trustworthy information sources to make sure that you're not simply following the hype. But as an example, in 2012, 12 years ago essentially, we got Julia, Elm, Go, and TypeScript. How many of those languages that I've mentioned resonate with you right now? Do you know about them, or maybe you're using them? Julia and Elm are very specific, very niche, and not very well known. Go, definitely more known, not as mature and not as used as you would expect for a 12-year-old language. And TypeScript is definitely, in everybody's mouth if they are part of the web industry. Whether they're using it or not, they know about it. They know that it exists. So back then, 12 years ago, when Microsoft released TypeScript, it would have made sense for you to say, okay, this sounds interesting. I'm gonna keep an eye on it. While I'm learning JavaScript, I'm also gonna be keeping an eye on this and see how it evolves. At least to be sure to be ready if people are starting to ask about it. At least I'll know what it means. So that's what you have to do. That's what you have to do while you're learning your language, essentially. Now, on the topic of languages, on the topic of technology, the second skill or advice here is to also keep an eye on frameworks. This is sort of the same thing, but not exactly. So languages definitely pop up every few years. Maybe some years you'll get more new languages, maybe in a few you don't get any. So it's a little bit easier to just keep an eye on them and not get overwhelmed. Frameworks, on the other hand, that's a whole different thing. Especially in the web industry, we're talking about becoming backend developers or being great backend developers. In the web industry, we get frameworks every year. If it's not a new framework, it's a new version of the framework that just breaks everything that we've been thinking about. Like when Next.js, they released version 13 or 14, and they suddenly made every component being a server component, and nobody knew how to use them. So really, this is about the same sort of practice. You have to keep an eye on the industry. You have to keep an eye on what people are talking about, how they're using these frameworks, and you have to find a way to also see or read about them, learn about them, or even tinker with them to understand if they follow some sort of paradigm that makes sense to you, and you will be able to pick it up in no time, or if it's completely different and you have to spend a few months reading and practicing to really understand how to use it. So this all comes with practice. You have to pick your language, and for that language, you'll have to pick a framework or library of choice that makes sense to you and that you know how to use for every project. But also keep an eye within your ecosystem what other things are popping up or what new versions of frameworks or libraries are popping up because of the same reason. Because you don't want the new version to overthrow whatever you're using and then suddenly become obsolete. This is a skill that every developer in any industry should master, but specifically in the industry of web, where it evolves so fast, or at least it changes so fast. We have to especially be proactive in trying to keep an eye on the industry, keep an eye on the technology that we're using, and see how it evolves, instead of ignoring it, thinking that we already know everything about the tech that we're using, and we're not going to need to update ourselves anymore. That's a sure way to be replaced. That's a sure way to be outdated very fast. So another skill, another thing that you should focus on aside from technology as a backend developer is on architecture and learning about architecture and learning about architectural patterns. So if you're coming from front end, maybe you're not really thinking about architecture, even though you should, but frameworks or like Vue, like React, they've abstracted and these concepts to a point where they already give you a specific architecture that you don't really have to think about it. Back in the day, in the first versions of Angular, you were thinking about MVC, MVPC, or things like that, and trying to figure out what was the best way to link the logic with the data, with the view. Now, in this like React, Vue, these frameworks, even Svelte, I think, they don't really force you to think about that. You can, and you should, but if you don't, that's fine. You can create great applications, great interfaces, without focusing on that. In the backend, even though, sure, some frameworks will also abstract that concept, you usually have, for big applications, for big platforms, you usually have a lot more logic to deal with that tends to be a bit more complex than what happens in the front end. And I'm not trying to say here that front end is easier than backend. They're completely different things. They're all programming, so I treat them as the same thing. They have different focuses, right? So this is not me saying one is easier or more difficult than the other. They're just different. In the backend, in my experience, you usually have the core business logic for most of your platform, for most of your product. That means that you have to be careful about how you architect all of that logic, so that it can scale, so that it's resilient to problems, so that it's easier to maintain, easier to develop, and that is where patterns like microservices, like reactive architecture, like MVC even come to fruition. So learn about architectural patterns, learn about the best practices in the industry, and learn why those patterns matter. It's not just about putting everything in endpoints in your next application and be done with it. That's one way to do it, and definitely Next in particular has ways to be deployed that those endpoints end up being serverless functions, and that is a pattern on its own. Like I was saying, I mean, the frameworks might enforce a pattern on you without you even thinking about that. But it doesn't mean you don't have to think about them. It means that you have to be aware of them, and you have to have the tools to decide whether the framework is doing the right thing for your particular product, or maybe you have to find other ways to do it. So that's definitely something you should think about. I will leave some links in the show notes for you to read more about that topic. Another skill or another technology that you should be focusing on, that you should be learning about, is databases. And this is not me just saying learn SQL and learn MySQL and you're done. There is a reason why there's so many different databases, and in fact you have a big split between SQL databases and not SQL databases, structured data versus non-structured data. That difference is something that you should know about. You should know that there are things known as NoSQL databases that don't follow the same pattern, that they don't use schemas, that they don't use structured data, but they are still very useful for specific use cases. In the realm of structured data, you usually work with MySQL, Postgre, and the Microsoft server, the Microsoft SQL server, or whatever it's called. Not much of a fan of it, honestly. But the point is, you usually have those three, and then whatever option you get on the cloud. Like in AWS, you have Amazon RDS, and GCP and Azure, they have their own. But those are just flavors of what you're already using. Essentially, you have a standard querying language that each of these other databases will add some flavor to it, but essentially they are all very similar to each other. If you move on to the NoSQL world, that changes very fast. You have key value pairs, you have document based, you have graph databases, you have columnar databases. There are way too many options. Vector databases, actually, which are very fun to use. The thing is, there are way too many options, and that might sound or might feel like overwhelming. And you just say, I'm good with MySQL databases. I don't need anything else. But that's not true. The NoSQL world exists for a reason, and they are key in some aspects to some architectural patterns. So you should be aware of them. You should know about them. You should even try to learn about them or use them if you can. My personal favorite is Redis. It's very versatile. You can do a lot with that single database, other than clearly relational stuff. But you can use them, and this is something that a lot of developers also confuse. It's not about choosing SQL versus NoSQL. It's about choosing the right combination of them. Big enough systems will need more than just one data storage or one database for different things. You might have your main storage within your SQL database, but you might also have like a Redis for different things, or for cache, or for quick in-memory operations. You might have Cassandra for time series data. There are a lot of options here, and you should not be closed to exploring the NoSQL world just simply because it's very varied. Just get in there, start learning about it, start seeing how different options out there. You'll see that, especially in the open source section, you'll find way too many alternatives for the same area, for key value or for columnar databases. You'll have 4 or 5 options. Just pick one. It doesn't really matter. Just pick one and learn about it. Learn how it's how it works and why you should use it, what kind of use cases it's good for, and you might get surprised. It's actually they're actually very useful in very niche specific cases, but in comparison with doing that using a SQL database, you'll see that you'll have to write way less code. You'll have way better results through the specialized version. And the very last one I'm going to cover, and yes, there are more, and yes, you should read the article I'm going to link you to, because it will have extra things that you should also focus on as a backend developer. But one thing that you should not ignore and you should absolutely work with and understand is APIs. Either using them as an external source of data or services, or even creating your own. APIs are just the contract around microservices. When I say APIs, I mean the whole thing, not just the contract, but rather the contract and the microservice itself. You have to understand it's sort of related to the part of architectural patterns. Microservice will play a big role in those patterns. So understanding what microservices are, what an API is, how they work together, and how you can use them and how you can create them is crucial for you to understand everything about how the client will interact with the services, how you can use services to interact with each other to create a scalable architecture. There are way too many aspects of backend development that rely on microservices and on APIs. Now, the two main patterns or the two main type of APIs out there are RESTful APIs and GraphQL. I've never personally used GraphQL other than in some instances where I've had to interact with an external GraphQL API, but most of my experience over my last 20 years of experience has been with RESTful APIs. RESTful APIs are great if they're implemented in the right way. That there's a reason why they're called REST. You should learn what it means, but just start understanding what an API is. Just start looking into API. Just start creating your own and seeing how not only you can make them interact and work with the front end, but also how you can get them to interact with each other. That's going to be crucial to all the architectural patterns that you're going to learn about. So that's also like a must-have and a must-learn for all backend developers. So that's it. This was a very short episode. I think that the key value you're going to get from the links I'm going to add in the description on the episode. I'm going to link you to some articles I've written about these topics and some articles I think that will give you more details, as well as the full article on this topic that will have other things like learning about version control or even CI/CD, which are core concepts for backend developers that I haven't really touched on, as well as also focusing on your soft skills. But as developers, we all should, and that's something that I'm always gonna push you on to learn, because it's definitely something that we can't learn through tutorials, that we can't learn through videos, but something that we need to develop to become great developers. But that's it. Remember, so to summarize, pick a language, pick a backend language. It doesn't have to be great. It doesn't have to be the best out there. There is no absolute best out there. Just pick one, focus on that. Keep an eye on the industry trends. Keep an eye on what people are talking about, what new languages and frameworks are popping up, and see if they stick, if they make sense to you. Otherwise, just ignore them and keep focusing on what you're doing right now. Understand patterns and learn about architectural patterns, learn about software architecture in general, and see how different patterns solve different type of problems in the backend. Learn about NoSQL, learn about SQL as well if you haven't really touched any database so far, but just keep the mind open to the NoSQL world as well. It's not, saying that you can work with databases is not just about learning SQL and learning about MySQL. It's also about learning the whole other world about NoSQL databases, what they can be used for, and how they solve different problems. So look into that as well. And finally, remember, learn about APIs. If you want to pick one type of API between RESTful APIs and GraphQL, my recommendation would be look into RESTful APIs. GraphQL entered as a potential replacement for RESTful APIs, but it's been around for years now, and I don't see the number of RESTful APIs diminishing. So I think that they will coexist for a while, and there are use cases where GraphQL makes a lot more sense than RESTful. But just look into, if you have to pick one, look into RESTful first. If you have the time, if you have the interest of both, just go nuts and look into both. But that's it. Remember to learn, to keep looking into more details about backend development. This is a very interesting world. This is a very exciting and constantly changing industry. And even though you're not creating something that is visual, you're still creating logic that is crucial to entire platforms and products. So it doesn't mean it's less interesting or less important. And that's it. Thank you for listening. Remember, I will add a ton of links in the show notes, so make sure to check them out. And if you enjoyed the video or enjoyed the podcast, make sure to like it, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, and share it around so other developers also learn a little bit. Catch you on the next one. And that was it for this episode of the Scripting Them podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Remember that you can find me online on Twitter at TheDeepMan123, and you can also find the podcast YouTube channel just searching for the Scripting Them on YouTube. Thank you again, and catch you on the next one.